Okay, making sure everything is up and running, and we are live here on our program. Hello, peace lovers and peacemakers. This is Sarah Jamshidi. Welcome to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. So I wonder, do you know feminism? Do you know the F word? Who created the women's movement? What are the social structure? What are the social frustration? And what are the social hierarchy that sparked women to take action against men? What happened and why? In this hour, we are talking with author who lays out and explains why these concepts are very important to talk about. Carol Hay is the author of Think Like a Feminist, The Philosophy Behind the Revolution. In her book, Carol unpacks more than 200 years of feminist thoughts with a language we can understand. She states that feminism has a PR problem. Then she explains why angry feminism and girl power feminists have stolen the radical potential of the feminism movement. She explains first wave, second wave, and third wave feminism and tells us why white women feminism is not the only problem that we should solve. So here I am bringing Carol Hay. Hello, Carol.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you and to host you on Peace Mindedly. Carol is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. She has written for New York Times, Boston Globe, and Aeon magazine. She divides her time between Boston and San Francisco. So I was reading the book and I was reading the paragraph under paragraph, and some of the paragraphs went on for about 1.5 pages. So I know that Carol is so enthusiastic about the concept, about feminism, and she talks the same way, fast and enthusiastically. Carol, tell us, in our interview that we had a few days ago, you said that you really wanted to explain feminism and explain what is feminism and what is the movement to people, to everyday people who understand the concept. So tell me, what is feminism?
What is feminism? Well, as I joke in the book, I think if you were to ask 10 different feminists what feminism is, you'll probably get 11 different answers. So there are feminisms. There are a lot of feminisms, and I don't claim to be speaking for all of them. But what I do try to do in this book is lay out some commonalities that I think that you can see across the movement. And so the way I like to put it is that someone is a feminist if they agree with the social science, if they agree with the history, if they agree with what these non-philosophers, but rather social scientists, historians, these people whose job it is to sort of look at human life. And basically all of these experts tell us that by every measure we have to measure quality of life, whether that's subjective reports of happiness, whether that's health, whether that's wealth, whether that's political representation, whether that's control over one's life, whether it's positive representations in media and in culture. There are a lot of different ways to measure the quality of human life. There isn't just one, but every single way that we have of measuring these differences, women don't do as well as men. And so you're a feminist if you recognize those realities. If you think that these realities are bad, that they're a bad thing, and that if you think that they can and should be changed. And then finally, I think feminists tend to agree that these aren't problems that are going to be sort of fixed piecemeal, right? So we can't fix the problems that women face without also simultaneously tackling problems of racism, tackling problems of classism, homophobia, ableism, all of these interlocking or interrelated oppressions. So the thought is that feminists now recognize that if we just try to make things better for women in general, what that almost always looks like is making things better for women at the top, right? Women who are already very wealthy, women who are able-bodied, women who are straight, women who are white. And there's been a history in the feminist movement of making these mistakes. And I think feminists are getting better at recognizing those mistakes and realizing that these problems really need to be tackled all at once.
Yeah, so you mentioned in order to tackle feminism and just explain this feminism movement, we also need to, take into consideration of ableism and racism and classism. So the question is, we have been throughout the history, we have been just dealing with masculine social structure and patriarchy. So that is that kind of discussion had to deal with the same concepts, and does the patriarchy had to ever consider ableism and racism and classism?
Oh, well, I think that what we see is the patriarchy is one of a number of different systems of oppression that all work in concert, right? So patriarchy is intimately tied up with classism, for example, and capitalism, and homophobia and these sorts of things. So these things sort of mutually support each other in various ways, right? The military-industrial complex, whatever it is, right? These things are all sort of interlinked. And so the thought is that most feminists don't think that the world order, the utopian world order we're hoping for is one where women have all of the power and men have none of it, right? This isn't one, like your mom always said, 2 wrongs don't make a right, right? So the solution isn't just to replace everything in the world that's masculine with something that's feminism. The solution is going to be much more complex than that. And it's going to really probably involve really rethinking how we think about gender, how we think about sex, how we think about sexuality and the relationships between men and women. And there are going to be a lot of different things that end up changing.
I wonder why some of the feminists are really frustrated and emotional, and when they start speaking, they become agitated and they get this label of a stereotype of angry women or angry feminists. Where is this coming from?
Well, I think it's in part just because it's how we see, or rather how we perceive a woman who's angry. Because when a woman is angry, she's not acting in a socially acceptable way, right? A man who is angry, he's being righteous, right? He's seeing injustice, or he's responding to something objective about the world, we tend to assume. Right. Whereas when we see a woman who's angry, we think, because we have this stereotype in the back of our mind that tells us that women are emotional and irrational. If we see a woman who's angry, we think, well, she's probably just, being crazy, right? Being hysterical, right? And we're much likelier to label her off or to write her off as a crazy woman than we are to listen to what she's saying and actually ask ourselves whether she has something that's worth being angry about. Right. Whereas when we see an angry man, we're much likelier to take him seriously and think, oh, he must be responding to something that's worth being angry about. Whereas I think too often we tend to think women are just being irrational or hysterical. And so we don't even really listen to what they say.
Is there history behind this kind of interaction that
Absolutely.
we think women, yeah.
Yeah. So I think so. It's interesting because philosopher Bell Hooks, she's a Black philosopher. She points out that for all of this tendency we have historically to paint women as irrational and hysterical, and men as rational and logical and analytical and even tempered, for all of the tendency we have to sort of like sort the sexes in these different ways. The one emotion that we really don't like to see in women, despite the fact that women are supposed to be emotional, the one emotion we really don't like in women is anger. And notice we also don't like emotion in people of color. We don't like anger. We don't like angry people of color. We don't like people who are poor to display too much anger. I mean, think, for example, of the way that the Trump campaign is trying to portray the events of this summer in America, right? All of the protests and things like that. Writing people at the margins off as angry is important for the status quo, because anger is the one emotion that might actually get things done. Right, so we can call women emotional if the emotions that they're experiencing are despair or like other sort of more feminine emotions, right? But if it's anger, and anger can actually motivate action. Anger can change the world, right? So Rebecca Traister is a novelist, or is a journalist who just wrote a book called All the Rage, and she actually talks about this sort of the formative power of women's anger and how there's a history of writing that off, right? So she talks about Rosa Parks, for example, right? We like to sort of think about Rosa Parks as this civil rights hero, and we tend to paint her as this meek woman who, just decided one day she wasn't going to give up her seat on the bus, right? It's a non-violent action. It's very, because it fits with our conception of what women should be like, right? Turns out if you actually knew Rosa Parks, apparently the woman was incredibly angry often because she was responding to actual injustice. And Traister tells a story about Rosa Parks threatening a boy who was threatening her with a brick, right, as a child, right? So this is an incredibly angry woman, but when we're cleaning up the story about what she's actually like, we don't, for history, we tend to paper over those things because we don't like these stories that paint women as angry, because we don't want to consider the fact or the possibility that they might actually really have something to be angry about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that I already asked, but I wonder. I'm still trying to get that why we do not accept women to get angry. I mean, is this? I understand this is stereotype. I understand. I mean, and particular women, particular segment of women. And then probably it's the best way to segment towards the intersectionality that you are addressing in your book. So I from reading the book, at least I understood that it's sort of not okay, but it's not too taboo for a white woman to get angry, but it's taboo for, as you said, I mean, we attach more emotion, we attach more negative stereotype and negative connotations against colored women. So how do you see that? Why there is so much differences between, white women feminism and colored women feminism?
So I think that basically there's a nice metaphor that I talk about in the book. It comes from the Black feminist philosopher Kimberly Crenshaw, and she talks about oppression as a basement. And so if we think of sort of anti-oppressive movements, right, whether that's anti-racism movements or feminist movements or anything else, we can look at who exactly these movements are trying to help. And Crenshaw says if we think of these movements as like a basement, we can think of everyone who's oppressed as in a basement. But some people are more oppressed than others. And too often these liberation movements, whether it be the civil rights movement or feminism or anything else, they focused really only on getting those people out of the basement who are barely in it. Right. And so she says if feminism acts as a sort of like single issue filter, right? If feminism is only really interested in the social issues that affect relatively privileged women, sure, maybe you might end up getting making things a little bit better for middle-class white women. And so what that looks like is a feminism that really wants to, get women into corporate leadership events. A feminism that thinks all we really need is more female politicians. A feminism, again, historically we saw this in the second wave of feminism. We saw a lot of feminists arguing that really the goal should just be to get for rich white women the privileges that rich white men already had. So, more access to careers and education and these sorts of things. Meanwhile, ignoring the fact that these rich white women, say Betty Friedan, for example, wrote this a book called the Feminine Mystique. And in the Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan talked about the problem that has no name. Right. And this was basically the ennui that suburban white women were experiencing post Second World War, when they were many of them were expected to be stay-at-home housewives, and they were bored and they weren't really feeling terribly fulfilled. And so Betty Friedan said, this is the problem that has no name. This is the biggest issue facing women today, is the fact that they're bored and they're not sort of reaching their full potential because they're not able to sort of fully participate in the public sphere the way men are. But of course, she's not talking about all women. She's talking about very, very rich women. Right? She's not talking about the poor women of color who these very rich women are employing to undertake the domestic work in their homes because they're quite wealthy, right? And so a feminism that really only focuses on those very privileged women, it's not helping women in general. In fact, it's maybe like you might think that a feminism like that is really just doing the patriarchy's work for it, because it's making things just as bad, if not worse, for all women by helping just a few women. And so the thought is that the feminism that we really need to get behind is one that looks at all women, not just the women who have the social capital to make their voices be heard, which has historically been middle class or wealthy, able-bodied, straight white women.
Is it possible? Is it possible to ever have this discussion of feminism for all women? I mean, I'm from Iran. I know Middle East. I know, Arab culture, Persian culture, Ottoman culture, Turk culture. I speak Turkish and so forth. And then I was back in Tehran, part of this women movement. Women were extremely, extremely angry, especially after the revolution, when many of the rights has taken away. Many rights. Women could not be a judge. Laws changed against women. Divorce law changed. Child custody so much, and then they became so angry, and the anger produced some of the extremely good results. And I always pride myself of being part of this. The result had been created, right? But here's what I'm reading the book, and I'm seeing that, and you're mentioning, I mean, the reason that I like the book is because you are mentioning about, so we are talking about white women privilege status, and we're talking about white feminism, and these are other kinds of feminism, like colored or so forth and so on. But here's the thing, honestly, I do believe that feminism or women movement or women argument has to be argued within its own context. You see, for instance, as I was back in Tehran, I got so upset when I saw a white woman professor is coming to Tehran and trying to preach us of how to do the work without, knowing that exactly what's going on. So I believe that, or at least, I mean, I just want to know your intake, that we tend to, in the white privileged society, tend to write prescriptions about, okay, so this is what you need to do, and this is feminism, and this is women. And do you know that how we can really fix this? Fix it in a way that to take the leadership, at least take a leadership in this this feminism argument, feminism conundrum.
Yeah, I do think, and this is one of those situations where I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that you're right, that historically we have seen the feminist movement be, especially internationally speaking, I think it's been one of the of women from the West, white women, going across the world and saying, we know what's best for you. You're very oppressed, and we're here to save you. There's been a sort of like savior complex, and it's been really, really problematic in a lot of ways. I do think that the movement is getting better at not making that mistake. And again, it's certainly not universal, but at least I think that there's becoming recognition within a lot of the Western feminist movement that if you're actually paying attention to decolonial, anti-colonial contexts, you really need to sort of understand world history and not think that there's going to be a one solution that's going to fit everyone. One of the ways that philosophically feminists approach this is to really take seriously the question about what it is that women have in common across these different lines of ethnicity, race, religion, these sorts of things. Because again, historically, too often, feminists have pretended to be talking for all women, but really what they were doing is just talking about women like them, right? Whether that was a cis woman or a Christian woman or a white woman or an American woman.
I have a ton of questions.
Getting better.
So what is
Please go ahead.
What is cis woman? What is cis woman? And do you know what are the commonalities that probably all the women's movement or all the feminist argument is sharing?
So this is actually an incredibly controversial question. It's a surprisingly controversial question. And it's actually one where I think most feminists now, they actually, the goal is what they call solidarity across difference. So they recognize that any attempt to actually articulate, this is the thing that all women have in common, is very, very likely to both leave many women out, but also end up sort of subtly prescribing a particular conception of womanhood. So one version of this argument comes from the philosopher and the gender theorist Judith Butler, and she says that any attempt to describe women is not merely descriptive but also normative. And what this means, just to unpack the jargon, is basically to say every time I say this is what women are like, I'm also implicitly saying this is what women should be like. And so if you're not like that, you're not a real woman. You don't count. And feminism shouldn't have to concern itself with you. And so one issue where that's a really a live debate right now in feminist circles and I think in larger sort of cultural discussions is in the question of trans women and whether trans women really count as women. Or whether the only real woman is a cis woman or a woman who's identified as female at birth.
What is cis woman? What is cis woman?
So cis is short for cisgender, and it just means someone whose gender identity matches on to the sex assigned to them at birth. So I was assigned the sex female, and I identify as a woman. So I'm cisgender. Whereas a transgender woman who was assigned the sex male at birth but identifies as a woman. And there are some people who call themselves feminists. I'm reticent to even call them feminists. They go by the acronym TERF, which is Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. And they say that you don't count as a woman unless you were born as a woman. And there are a lot of concerns about identifying femininity in this way, right? So I think that the example of this that your listeners might be most well acquainted with is J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is coming out saying a lot of really disappointing things about trans women. So much so that I have an 8-year-old daughter and she loves Harry Potter, and she and I are having this discussion about whether the Harry Potter books are going to stay in the house or not, because she's heartbroken because she knows trans people, she loves trans people, and she can't believe the author of Harry Potter would say such hateful things about trans women, and she does. It's really, really very disappointing.
Speaking of which, I know that we are recording from our houses, and there is this sound in the background, and probably the toy sound. That's cool. That's cool.
I'm sorry. There's an ice cream truck going.
Don't worry about it. Absolutely fine. It's the ice cream car. Oh my God! I thought that your daughter is
No.
Okay, and then in your household, there is a rule of not calling your daughter pretty.
That's right. Yes.
Why?
Yes. So I realized when she was a baby that it's like so much of the socialization that goes into how we treat children happens unconsciously. We don't even know we do it. And so I realized as soon as people knew that she was an infant, right? She was dressed in green, right, or yellow, right? But if they thought she was a girl, they treated her very, very differently than if they thought she was a boy. And so they would say, pretty girl, and she's very soft and sweet and cooing, right? Or if they thought she was a boy, they'd say, buddy, rough her up a little bit and throw her around, and oh, he's so strong. And so the very same infant, people will treat very, very differently depending on what they think is happening in the infant's diaper, which is crazy when you think about it, right? And so I thought, that there has to be a way to sort of subtly undermine. I mean, obviously you can't completely, it would be probably not good to sort of completely get rid of the socialization, but to sort of undermine these really, really overwhelming sources of socialization that kids are subject to. Because when we call a little girl pretty, we're not intending explicitly to tell her, by the way, you are growing up in a society where the most important thing about you is that you are physically appealing to men. That's not the message we think we're giving little girls, but that is one of the messages that we're giving them when we, saturate them with Disney princesses. Whether we mean to or not, we're telling them that the most important thing about them is what they look like, not what they like to do, not what they like to think about, not what they do with their bodies, not what they do with their minds, but what they look like. And this is not a message we give to little boys. We should probably do it more. We should call little boys handsome. We should call them pretty. We should tell them they're looking really cute today. And we should tell little girls that a lot less. And instead we could do things like, one of the things I talk about in the book is we just need to up our small talk game with little kids, right? If we can just, and notice how hard it is to do it first, and notice what that tells us about how much of this was going on unconsciously. Because as a lot of feminists think, a lot of these forces of socialization, they're unconscious. We don't realize we're doing them. But then we think by the time we're adults, men and women are so completely different. Well, of course they are. We've treated them differently since day one. So if you can sort of just, take the edge off that a little bit, it probably will give a child, and then the person they become as an adult, just more flexibility in the world to be who they really are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're going to go to the reintroduction. When I come back, I have two questions. One is what happened that you decided to go in this field of feminism? And the second one is where is love and intimacy in this argument? So stay with me, please. You are listening to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. Every week up until November 24, we are coming back on Tuesdays talking about various subjects. In fact, this week is about feminism, and our author is talking and unfolding feminism for us. Last week, it was about women's stories and how history has retold women's stories in a way that has been denigrating against women, and we need to change that. For next week, we we are talking with another philosophy professor from New York, Massimo Pigliucci. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing the name correctly. If I don't, I'm going to do a better job next week. He is the author of A Field Guide to a Happy Life, 53 Brief Lessons for Living. It's a small book, easy to read book. And honestly, after reading Carol's book, I thought that I need to read a bit easier book so then I can get my mind back to more serious stuff. After that, we are talking with Deborah Olsen, the author of The Healing Power of Girlfriends, How to Create Your Best Life Through Female Connection. So we are connection. I believe that connection these days, it's very, very important. We are in pandemic. Our life has been turned upside down because of the pandemic. And then probably connection is something that we yearn for, we want to have, we do want to have. So here's the issue. I mean, it depends on where you are watching the program, but I believe that because I experienced war and casualty, I experienced revolution, and I experienced very tension society. And in my experience, I truly found and has found that during the hardship and during the difficult circumstances, the only thing and probably the only response is kindness, compassion, and love and peace. So therefore, we are focusing on that. Depends on where you are watching this program. Most probably, the pandemic has influenced your life, and also the climate change that we are dealing with. We are in the state of Washington, in Seattle, and then just up until last week, breathing was very difficult for us because of smoke that were coming from the burning forests in California. And I have many friends in Florida, in many of the states that is dealing with flood. So we are dealing with some serious matters in our life, and I'm thinking that connection through kindness, compassion, and peace is one of the keys to encounter in our life. Preparing myself for the show, I thought, okay, so I really would love to see probably what Rumi says about kindness and compassion. And I thought, okay, I'm just gonna open Masnavi, Rumi's masterpiece, and see what comes into what I'm gonna read, and if it's really related to the program, I will just say it or read it in the program. And I mean, you don't it's very hard to believe that the poems that I opened was one of the very famous poems, and is specifically talking about kindness and about compassion. So if I may, I would love to read the poems in Farsi, and then I translate it in English, and then we go to our guest. So it says, از محبت تلخ‌ها شیرین می شود، از محبت مس‌ها زرین می شود، از محبت مرده زنده می کنند، از محبت شاه بنده می کنند. Muhabbat in Arabic means compassion, and kindness comes from the word hub. And hub in Arabic, Farsi, and Turkish means love. So basically, the translation of the poems, I just missed the few lines because I didn't want to bore you with the Farsi saying. But the translation is, out of kindness, sour becomes sweet. Out of kindness, copper becomes gold. Out of kindness, pollute becomes pure. Out of kindness, pain becomes cure. Out of kindness, dead becomes alive. Out of kindness, kings become slave. So it's the second book, lines 1530 to 1533. And then I really believe that this is through the kindness and compassion that we can overcome many of the obstacles. And I believe that perhaps women are a bit more capable of showing the kindness and compassion for one particular reason. It's like a gift has given to us when we hold a baby in our body, and then when we give birth to the baby, and then we have to. It's just that child has no one but the mother for a number of months and probably for years to come. And then it doesn't mean that men provide, men are kind. I know many kind and compassionate men, but nevertheless, I believe that at least women show more kindness and compassion through connection. But here's the thing. Here is the argument. We are not pussycats. We are not. And although that we do have this capacity of showing kindness and compassion, but if there is a time to fight, and to fight for our rights, to fight for what we deserve, we demand it and we fight for it. And there is no better person to talk about good fight but Carol Hay, author of Think Like a Feminist, The Philosophy Behind the Revolution. In this book, Carol explores the social construction of gender in masculine society. She forcefully states that feminism must accept trans women as women. She explains how the feminists perceived sexual assault and rape culture. She advises on how to encounter misogynist actions and behaviors without getting angry, and within more constructive pattern. I should say that, usually we are discussing about the feminism through the many lenses. And my question for Carol is, Carol, so here's first, I want to see what happened, why you decided you would like to write about feminism and about to encounter this field as your profession.
Sure. So I think I was, as a philosopher, I became a philosopher not coming from an academic background or an academic family. My sister and I were the first people in our family to go to university, and so I never. I think a lot of academics are used to being surrounded by other academics, other intellectuals, and used to having conversations sort of restricted to those people, and that wasn't my background. And so I became a professor, I got tenure, I did all the things you're supposed to do. I wrote a book for other academics that I'm sure 12 people have read, and then I sort of thought I wanted to write about things that I thought other people could really access. And as a feminist, sort of personally and politically, I knew that these ideas weren't so esoteric, so difficult to grasp, that they weren't the sort of thing. It wasn't as if there was something about the subject matter itself that needed to put people off. And I knew that if I presented these ideas in the right way, right, if I made it as easy to read as possible, if I made it funny, then people might be willing to actually engage with it. And so that's why when I was given the opportunity to write this book for a broader audience, I jumped on it. And I do think that this is something that that a lot of people really are curious about. There are a lot of misconceptions about feminism. I think, as I say in the book, it's got a PR problem. Sometimes people think it's a dirty word, and it struck me as this is something that my training could help me clear up. It could help people really understand what feminism is about, and that this is something that could help both people in their individual lives, and then also help making those bridges that you talk so much about in this program, right? Making these connections to other people, right? Whether that's other women, other men, other social groups. And so I think a book like this really stands to help people think through both what they're going through personally, right? I know that, for example, a lot of women are dealing with the pandemic and realizing that they're, that their lives are just untenable, right? The amount of work that they're putting into homeschooling their children, raising their children without any of these sort of all the social supports have fallen away, and so much of this work that was already falling disproportionately on women is now falling on them even more. And what's interesting is that also I think many men are realizing this, right? In heterosexual couples, men are now realizing, oh my God, I had no idea how much work kids really are, because even the wealthiest men at this point, the work can't be outsourced anymore. I mean, now we're starting, people are bringing back their nannies and these sorts of things. But for a while there, every single family really understood how much work this is. And hopefully, I think maybe they're also realizing how much we're exploiting the people who had been tasked with this work, whether that was mothers, whether that was, paid nannies or babysitters or daycare workers or teachers. Right. And so ideally, one good thing that might come out of the pandemic that we're living through is a new appreciation of the amount of work that it takes to raise the next generation of citizens. And hopefully that we're not going to just fall back into the exploitation of that work, and really maybe appreciating it more.
Yes, hopefully. Okay. So I don't want to stick exactly with the questions, but I'm really eager to know. The book is written and explained in a way that it's very easy to understand. Although the concepts, sometimes the concepts can get overwhelming, but if you stay through the process, it's easy to understand. So how did you acquire this language to explain the book in a way that is easy to understand?
I think in part it's been informed by my teaching. So I've been teaching university for probably about 20 years at this point, and I've been teaching feminist theory to a lot of different kinds of students. And so when you do it this long, you start to sort of see there are sort of common blind spots. There are certain common mistakes that people tend to make, or common things that people tend to get hung up on. And you develop these tricks to sort of fly under the radar. You realize, oh, this is a situation where you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Or, even often, I think sometimes what it is just admitting that the stereotypes are what they are, right? I mean, I find it very, very helpful to go into a classroom and just have students talk to me about, okay, Hart, what are your stereotypes of gender? What do you think men and women really are like? And at first, they think they shouldn't be honest about this, so I have to get the ball rolling and start laying out some of these. Some of them are kind of offensive stereotypes, right? That women can't drive and men won't ask for directions and these sorts of things. And then he turned it into a bit of a joke, and it's a bit of a battle of sexes between the students. But it's important to do this because we need to sort of point to all of the ways that we unthinkingly put people in boxes, right? We unthinkingly pretend that if someone's a woman, this is what they're going to be like. If someone's a man, this is what they're going to be good at. And once we realize just how unthinkingly we do that, we can hopefully stop doing it quite so often, and we can hopefully realize just how constraining this is for people to have these expectations placed upon them and not really have any other options for how else they might want to live your life, right? So you were mentioning earlier that you think that because many women have the experience of having a child, of bearing the child, of caring for the infant, that this attunes them to something in the world, right? It gives them skills that men aren't as likely to have just because they haven't been given the gift of having these experiences. And I think that's absolutely right. But that's not necessarily anything to do with our biology necessarily, right? I mean, especially now with I didn't breastfeed my daughter. I didn't want to. In part because I wanted her father to be able to have that close, intimate bonding time with her as well, right? And I think that we're as a society, we're realizing that these things are not as tied to our biology as we used to be and as we think we are. And that there's a variety of human experiences, and there's a richness in human experiences that we tend to segregate off into boxes and say, these are the things that men get to do and these are the things that women get to do. And notice how strictly we police people who cut against those boundaries, right? So I don't know. I suspect as a woman who's articulate, who's intelligent, who's opinionated, you've probably once or twice come in your life come into contact with men who thought you just weren't being very feminine. I mean, I get that all the time as a philosopher because I've got opinions, right? And so too, a man who's calm, who's quieter and more compassionate and more empathetic and better at listening, right? I'm sure he faces all sorts of social backlash for not acting in appropriately masculine ways. And it wouldn't it be nice if just culturally we could get beyond that and actually just encourage people to develop a wide swath of views and characteristics and things they're good at. I mean, I think our lives as humans would be better, and we would get so much more out of life if we were given more flexibility, and if the shackles of gender were loosened, And
this is exactly what the book is talking about. Think like a feminist. So how can we think like a feminist?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of ways to think like a feminist. I think a lot of it has to do with learning the history, learning the history of how men and women have been treated differently, how have been faced with these different expectations, and then really ourselves asking, is this who I am? Is this what I want? Is this just because society tells me this is what's appropriate for someone like me? Do I need to be shackled to that, or can I have more flexibility and ask myself what I really want, not just because this is what I'm told people like me should want. Right.
Something I think it's, at least in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, is happening is this notion of big sister. So back in old days, I don't know, maybe 25, 28, I don't know, many years ago, it was this notion that, okay, women need to be toughen up, be a bit more masculine and go up the ladder. And when they go up the ladder, they close the door and they shut and they stay there for the rest of their life, and they do not help any other women. But right now we have this, especially after Me Too movement, we have this new notion that a sisterhood notion. That, okay, so I'm going up the ladder and I'm gonna help as many women as I can, and I'm gonna just be. I have a goosebump. I mean, it's just this notion of we are in this together and we're gonna not fight per se, not an angry fight, but we are gonna fight against this, a good fight together. So is this something is happening, you think?
I think so. One of the things I talk about in the book is there's a very complicated history of solidarity amongst women, right? Other oppressed groups at least have the luxury of being able to hate their oppressor. Right? Think about this, right? So whether it was like Black people who were forced to be chattel slaves in America, right? Or Jewish people in the ghettos in Europe, right? At least they were given the luxury of having each other and of being able to hate their oppressor. And there's a strength in that, right? There's a strength in sort of in banding together with people like you. Right? Women haven't been permitted that historically, because women almost always have more in common with the men in their lives than they do with women across lines of race, across lines of class, across lines of religion. And this makes it incredibly hard for women to bond together in these forms of with these bonds of solidarity, because they often don't really have much in common with each other, right? And it's prevented women from having the kind of collective action that you've seen in other groups where you band together and you have strength in numbers, right? And so historically, we've seen that women actually have had trouble with solidarity because they often don't have much in common. I think that's starting to change. I think in part we are sort of seeing some commonalities that many women experience, right? So for example, in the Me Too movement, what we're seeing, right, so many women coming together and saying, yes, we do have these shared experiences of unwanted sexual contact and unwanted sexual advances from men. It's not just me, it's not just a few women, it's a lot of women, the vast majority of women, really. And so women are now able to sort of band together and realize that these are common experiences. I think we've seen these moments several times throughout history. We saw it in the 70s with consciousness raising groups. But again, those groups tended to be very homogenous in terms of race and class, right? Whereas one of the things that's exciting about the Me Too movement is that it seems to sort of span race, span class. And we're seeing a lot more women sort of banding together and recognizing that these are shared problems, and hopefully and we're starting to see shared solutions as well.
So far, I think we have had about 3 waves: first wave feminism, second wave, and third wave. So can we see any of these implications in the fourth wave feminism, or how does, in your opinion, the fourth wave feminism might look like?
I don't know. I see. The way, as I say in the book, the wave metaphor is useful in some ways, but it's also sort of because it gives the impression that the first wave is done. The first wave was about getting women the right to vote, getting women the right to own property, these sort of formal legal equalities. But again, that's still, like, we're not done everywhere, not across the world, and these are still victories that we have to defend, right? So the first wave isn't yet done. The second wave then was supposed to be moving beyond these formal legal equalities to more sort of informal sources of inequality, right? So the informal norms and ways we interact with people, things that you can't write laws about, but still prevent women and men from being equal.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so even just a lot of expectations of gender, right? So the thought that women women aren't good at math. Women aren't good at logical thinking. Women aren't good at spatial rotation. So women really shouldn't be doctors, lawyers, engineers, these sorts of things, because they're really not good at it. Of course, if you tell someone they're not good at something, chances are very good they're not going to be very good at it, right? And so second wave feminism realized that if you that we have to start chipping away at these informal things, right? So we can't just fix marriage laws so that women can now jointly own property with their husbands. That would be something that first wave feminism was focusing on. Second wave feminism is also looking at these informal, distribution of care work within the house, right? So you can't write a law that tells husbands that they have to empty the dishwasher, right? But the fact that husbands never emptied the dishwasher are going to make it harder for wives to, flourish in the rest of their lives if they're stuck doing most of the domestic labor at home, right? So second wave feminism looks at this sort of more informal stuff. Again, it's a work in progress. Third wave feminism then came along in the 1970s or so, 70s, 80s. And third wave feminism realized that these first two waves of feminism had been, as I'd said earlier, focusing far too much on women who are already very privileged, right? Rich women, white women, these sorts of things. And so third wave feminism really focuses on making sure we have all women in our sights, not just very privileged women. And it focuses and make sure we have a recognition that the goal should be to help usually, especially disadvantaged women. And so I don't know if we're ready for a fourth wave, because I don't think we're done with the first three. I don't know, sometimes people say we're in a sort of post-feminism or a feminist utopia, but no, I mean, I think I don't think we're done with the first three. I think all three are still, the battles of all three are still being fought. I think we've definitely made progress, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, so I received an email from one of our audience. They ask, do you read any other, what other books do you read other than philosophy and feminism, books related to feminism?
You're looking at my bookshelves.
Yeah, probably that's what they're asking.
That's great. I try to read as widely as possible, honestly. I try to read, as you can see from behind me, there's fiction, there's nonfiction. I read male authors, I read female authors. I think my favorite authors are those who really appreciate words for their own sake in some ways, right? So some people really like a good story. I like a good sentence, if that makes sense. So, yes, thank you, Carissa. Right, we really do. We are still working on the first three waves of feminism. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And are you thinking? Okay, the other question: are you thinking about any other books? I mean, in the topic of feminism.
Your next book? To write more going forward? I am, but I'm still in early stages. I don't know. I mean, so this is the writing for the public is something that I'm relatively new at. And so I've got the professor job that's my main gig, and this is sort of a side gig, and I'm really enjoying it. But I've got some more sort of straightforward philosophy that I'm going to be writing first before I sort of move to the next book. But there are these issues in sort of in presenting feminism to a general audience that I do want to continue to explore. So I think if this book sells well enough, I would certainly love to be able to write a second one. Yeah. Excellent,
Carol. Stay with us. You are watching to Peace Mindedly. You are listening Peace Mind to. Okay, so. Start all over again. You are listening to Peace Mindedly, a podcast show featuring peaceful bridge makers. For this hour, we are talking with Carol Hay, philosophy professor at University of Massachusetts Lowell, and author of Think Like a Feminist. So I do have the book with me, Think Like a Feminist. You can find the book in online. Basically, this is how our life is right now at this stage. So we shop online and we try to, not to go out because of the pandemic and so forth as much as possible. But the book is available online, also available on goldtoon.com, a website I manage with Mateen and with a group of foreign correspondents. You can obtain the book from many places. Amazon.com is also another place that you can find the book. It's a good read. It's easy to read and easy to understand. And I do recommend the book to whoever is interested to learning more about women's movement and how it's shaped and the philosophy behind the movement. So you can find our show on so many social media channels, on Facebook, on YouTube, on where else? Periscope. It's the uh, application supported by Twitter, and then so many areas. Also, we edit and upload the audio version of the same conversation on many podcast channels: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and many places. So just search Peace Mindedly and you'll find us. Yes, and if you would like to talk with us, I just had a few questions, 3-4 questions from our audience through email. So if you ask your questions, we do our best to feature it in our program. So let me see. Yes, here, Parisa, let me see. Parisa usually supports us in every way that she can. One of my favorite subjects. Thank you. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much for watching. And education. Yes, Parisa is a big fan of education, and I know about that. About Parisa. So yes, at the end of the program, we ask our guests to share a statement, a prayer, or something meaningful about peace, about kindness and compassion. And I'm just gonna have let me see, Carol to tell us what she would like to share with us about peace, kindness, and compassion. Yes.
This is hard. I thought about a reading and I couldn't decide on one. So, but I love what you do with this podcast, and I think it's really important. And I think for me, the one of the things that motivates me to be a feminist and motivates my work as a philosopher is this sense of interconnection that we have with all other people. And if we can be open and non-judgmental and really hear people where they are, and I think that ability, it's not easy. It's not easy to approach someone with walls, with our walls down. But if we can do it in a way that's non-judgmental and really try to hear people where they are and have them hear us where we are, I think that possibility is something that leaves open the chance of real social change, I think.
Yes, hopefully. Okay, Carol, I know that I closed the program by sharing statements about peace, but I just remembered that I desperately wanted to ask one question and I didn't. And I'm going to ask that question.
Okay.
So, Carol, where is love and intimacy in this argument? So so in your opinion, is there space for love, intimacy, sex, enjoying sex, ecstasy, and this kind of things in this feminism argument?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is. I think that there's room for a kind of genuine connection because I think true genuine connection needs to happen between equals. And I think that if we follow gendered scripts, men and women aren't set up to be equals, not in the world as it is now. And so I think that the possibility of true intimate connection is possible. Really only stands if we're meeting each other as equals. And I think feminism is that possibility. It means fighting against gendered scripts, gendered norms. And so that whether that's in the home, in the sharing of the domestic labor, right, whether that's in the bedroom, it means just not going along with what society tells you that people like you, whether you're a man or woman. This is what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to want. But I think feminism gives us the tools to break down those shackles of expectation. And if we do that, then we stand a chance of really, really intimately connecting. And it's certainly been the case in my life that once you really, really move beyond gendered expectations, and there's a chance of real love, I think.
So how it unfolds in your life? So how in your relationship went beyond gender expectations and had create intimacy?
For me, honestly, it involved a divorce. It involved a divorce from someone who was not as egalitarian as he said he was, and for me it was not a life I could live, and it was not a life I wanted for my daughter to have to live. And so I left that relationship and I started a new one with a new person who's And it's actually it's a meeting of equals, and it shatters all gendered conventions. My partner is actually a trans man now, and so it's a queer relationship, and it's an actual relationship built on equality, and it's something that I'm really happy my daughter gets to see, and it's honestly it's something that's made for a lot of happiness in my life as well. So
beautiful.
That's not
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So think, if I can show this, yes, Think Like a Feminist, Carol Hay, the philosophy behind the revolution. Best of luck with the book and with the feminism life, with the love life, and with everything, with the faculty life and all of those. Thank you so much for being our honored guest. Here I have Matin with me, my assistant producer, who was just doing. Matin, we can hear you.
Oh, I am.
Okay. Yeah, but now we can hear you.
Okay. I said thank you so much for a great discussion. As always, I learned so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And yes, so Khoda Hafiz. Let me see. Khoda Hafiz.